Welcome everyone. This class we're going to do here is all about the pelvis, pelvic alignment. So we're going to talk about how the pelvis is a bowl that energetically holds the element of water, water representing our emotions. And if we can keep our pelvis in a more neutral position, we're less likely to either be emotionally erratic or emotionally withheld by how the pelvis is positioned. So if you look at the pelvis, it has one of two different tilts, an anterior pelvic tilt and a posterior pelvic tilt. Anterior is where all the energy spills out. You can even see by the way I stand, very hyper expressive. Conversely, posterior pelvic tilt, a little bit more aloof or may be lacking of emotion, even in just the energy of my body. And what we want to do with our pelvis is create a level pelvis from right to left, a neutral pelvis from front to back, right? And a squared pelvis relative to the front of the mat. So we have squared pelvis, level pelvis, neutral pelvis. And this class, this sequence is going to work on all of that. All right, so we'll go ahead and start in a seated position. And as you sit, all I want you to do is notice your pelvis. It tends to naturally sit back whenever the legs are in front, putting us into a posterior pelvic tilt. We compensate by rounding the back. So what we're going to do from here is tilt the hip points forward, so bringing the pelvis in more of an anterior tilt, pulling the front ribs in, and then stacking the head over the spine. Take a moment, close your eyes, begin to deepen your breath. Breathing from your pelvic floor all the way up through your core, and then right back down. As always, our breath becomes our guide. Tune into your breath throughout the practice. All right, so we'll get into some movement now, working on the pelvis, coming forward into a tabletop position. Begin by setting up your hands, index fingers forward, fingers spread wide, pressing down into the ground, and then just start moving around in a really natural way. So move your pelvis, feel the different ways the pelvis can move, the anterior and posterior tilt, kind of like cows and cats. Feel free to do some spinal movement with your cow and your cat. We're just working on moving into the pelvis and into the spine. Feel free to go forward and back. So just organic movements here. And then eventually we're going to settle into a neutral position. So pressing through the palms, the shoulder blades spread across the back, lift the back of the head. Now, bottom ribs pull in. That movement alone is what's going to neutralize the pelvis because it engages the transverse abs. Transverse abs connecting from the lower rib cage to the pelvis and the pubic bone. So when they engage, they cinch, they knit, and they put the pelvis in a neutral position and the spine in its neutral position as well. So we're going to find that now in our tabletop. From here, I'm going to have you extend your right leg straight back, but keep the ball of the foot on the mat. And I want you to notice with my pelvis, what tends to happen when we lift the leg is the pelvis lifts, tilts, and dumps forward. So what we're going to do is maintain that neutral pelvis, pulling the hip points up, bottom ribs in. I press my right hip down, and I just use my glute to lift that right leg off the ground. Holding the right leg straight. It's not too high, maybe just a couple inches, without dumping into my pelvis. And I'm going to take my left hand to my ribs, pulling in and just holding for 3, 2, back and neck long, and 1, bringing it down and switching it out. Left leg extends. We start with the foot on the mat. We're going to make sure we're not lifting from our lower back or from the pelvis. So I take my right hand, pull it into my lower ribs, left leg lifts, and I'm using just the glute and the hamstring to hold that leg in space. Staying engaged, level pelvis. 3, 2, and 1, placing it back down on the ground. Now both legs are going to straighten out into our plank. Here's a place where we notice the pelvis as well. We pull the hip points up, or think about pulling the bottom ribs in. Heart forward a little bit, take a big inhale breath, and then exhale, come down all the way to the ground. Pressing your pubic bone into the floor, lift the chest, low cobra. Maybe move the head a little bit. And then eventually coming to the top of cobra, elbows fully extend, shoulders draw back. I'm pushing down into my hands. Still have my knees on the mat, still in my cobra, and I'm pressing my pubic bone to the floor, pulling up through the hip points and in through the lower part of my belly. From here, we'll curl the toes. I like to lead with my hips with a sense of ease into downward facing dog. And then we'll walk the dog, pedal it out. Just move around a little bit and play with the movement of the pelvis. So kind of twist your hips a little bit, drift the hips from side to side. And then we'll slowly walk all the way to the top of the mat, take a wide stance. Toes are in a little bit, bend the knees, sway from side to side, grabbing a hold of the elbows, head hangs heavy, maybe a little sway front to back. Good, and we're going to come up onto the fingertips, take our half lift here, spine extension, lower ribs drawing in, arms come out wide like a T, so level pelvis, pull the front ribs in, and then rise all the way up. As we come up, we want the hip points to move forward, okay? Hip points forward, pulling up and in, reach the arms overhead, and then we'll take a side body stretch over to the left, and I allow the hips to shift away from my side stretch. Away. I feel the outer edge of my right foot as my right arm reaches over. Big breath here. Back up to center. And then reaching over to the right, I let the hips move to the left. Get the side stretch. One more deep breath. Good. Coming back up to center. Now from here, we're going to concentrate on pulling hip points up, front ribs in, and then we'll take it all the way down to the ground. All right, adding a little bit of a twist. I'm going to use my block here. I go block underneath the right shoulder. I'm going to start with a bend in the right knee, right hand down, turning chest to the left, and then reaching up, straight up in the air. Okay, now to level the pelvis here, I'm going to begin to straighten the right leg. That shifts my hips, so I need to shift the hips to the right a little bit. I'm going to come higher on my block to keep that level pelvis, and then you'll notice there's even less of a twist. There's more resistance you might feel here in this twist. Take another deep breath into it, and switch. So I'll go left knee bent, left hand down. Chest is going to rotate to the right, right arm reaching to the sky. Now I'll start to straighten the left leg, and I'm going to shift my hips to the left while I press down and rotate the chest, and doing my best to keep a level pelvis. And it may not be fully level here, but that's what we're working on. Very intense twist. One more breath. And release. Heels come in, toes pivoting outward. Yogi squat. Okay, find a little bit of movement here in your pelvis, in your ankles, your knees. And then planting the hands on the mat, stepping back to your plank. Remember, you feel strength when you're in plank. You press the earth away, and then exhale, chaturanga. This time just hovering, inhaling, upward facing dog, pressing pelvis toward the floor, lifting up, and then exhale, downward facing dog. Okay, deep breath. Knees are going to bend. Walk, step, or hop to the top of your mat. We're going to have the feet about 1 to 2 fist distance apart. Okay, toes are pointed forward. Inhale, half lift. Lots of ways to do it. Fingertips, hands to shins, or as I like to do, reach the arms back to get extension in the spine, pulling in through the lower ribs. As we exhale, fold forward. Grab a hold of your ankles or your calves. All right, we're going to bend the knees and sit back into chair pose. Now in chair pose, my spine will hyperextend if my pelvis tilts anteriorly. So what I can do from here is pull the hip points up and the front ribs in. Now with an exhale breath, I'm going to sweep the hands behind. What I want to imagine that I'm doing is pulling my pelvis up, lifting it up with my hands as I rise to stand. So the pelvis pulls upward. I don't stay here. I pull it up, reach up, and then exhale, fold forward. Inhale, half lift. Exhale to the bottom of a push-up, chaturanga. Inhale, up dog. Exhales down. Take a deep breath. Lift your heels. Knees bend, jumper step. Inhale breath, half lift. You can reach back. Exhale, grab ankles or calves. Bend the knees, tailbone down, hip points pull up. Exhale, hands sweep behind. Now we're pulling the hip points up. Almost think like a tailbone tuck without squeezing the glutes, without squeezing the butt. Then you can find upper back extension. And then exhale, folding forward. Inhale, fingertips, half lift. Exhale, bottom of push-up, chaturanga. Inhale, up. Exhales down. We're going to do one more round, taking a deep breath. Lift the heels. Knees bend, jumper step. Inhale, reaching back. Exhale, grab. Bend the knees, pull the hip points up, tailbone tucks. Exhale, hands sweep. Hip points lift up, pelvis forward, relax your butt. And then exhale, bring it all the way down. Inhale, we lengthen out. Exhale, chaturanga. Inhale, up. And exhale, downward facing dog. All right, one of the more common things that we do in our practice is a leg lift. So we're going to concentrate here on keeping a neutral pelvis. So as my right leg lifts, I level my pelvis. Right hip down a little bit. Left heel presses back. I hug my right thigh toward midline. And then exhale, bring the knee to the chest and step to the right thumb. Okay, in a runner's lunge, there tends to be a hip misalignment as well here. So we're going to work on that. Outer right hip draws back. Left leg is really strong and straight. Lower your pelvis down. Let the knee touch the ground. Top of your left foot pressing into the earth. Tucking the tailbone under. Feel your hip points pull up and your belly draw in. Anjaneyasana. Good. Keep front ribs pulled back. Left foot pressing into the mat. And then exhale into half splits. I don't let my hips shift too far back. And I notice if my right hip kind of rides a little high, I'll sit the right sit bone down. Deep breath again. And we're going to come into our runner's lunge. Inhale, breath. Exhale, chaturanga. Inhales up. Exhales down. All right, squared hips as that left leg lifts. There's always that tendency to lift higher, and we tend to open. So we're going to rotate left hip down and hug left thigh in. Exhale, bring it to the chest, taking that step, runner's lunge. Pelvis comes down a little bit, chest lifts. We'll lower the back knee. Now, before I even commit to this movement, top of right foot, I feel my tailbone reach under, tuck, hip points up, and then rise Anjaneyasana. Pulling the front ribs down and in, pulling the lower belly in and up. Exhaling to half splits. I'll level my pelvis by bringing my left sit bone down a little bit. Coming forward into a runner's lunge, and then back into chaturanga. Inhaling up, or cobra. You'll notice I might go into my cobra pose throughout the practice. Exhales, downward facing dog. Okay, so now we move on to our sun B. And what we did in the last sequence was prepare the psoas, the hip flexor. Did a little bit of prep in the warm-up part of the sequence. And now we're going to put together our sun B using a warrior one, concentrating on the pelvis alignment. Okay, downward facing dog. Right leg lifts, squared hips. Exhale, step to right hand. I'm pretty ambiguous with that cue, so maybe it's the thumb, maybe it's the wrist, maybe you replace the hand. My back foot is flat. And what I'm going to have us do here, shift the hips to the left a little bit because they tend to move out to the right. And we're going to slowly straighten the front leg and rise up. Now this can help me see if I'm squared to the front or not. I can make a little adjustment here. Hips are pulling up because instantly we tend to go into our lower backs. Hip points up, ribs in, reaching up with my hands. Now with my exhale breath, I'm going to bend and press through the outer edge of my back foot as I sweep my hands behind. Now I'm ready to set up my normal warrior one. I'm going to pull those hip points up. As I rise up, I'll bring the palms to touch. Keep everything centered midline. Exhale, chaturanga. Inhaling up dog. Exhales down. Left leg lifts. Stepping toward that left hand, kind of ambiguous. Back foot flat. Now this first one, the legs are straight as we rise up. Straight leg. Squaring the pelvis. So we have squared, neutral, hips up, level. Exhale, breath, bend and sweep, press through the back foot edge. My hip points are going to pull up as I rise up, palms touch, warrior one. Exhale, chaturanga. Inhaling up, exhales down. Now with the breath, focus on the pelvis though. Inhale, exhale, step. Back foot flat, straight leg, inhale, rise. Exhale, bend the knee, sweep the hands behind. Keep the bend, pull the hip points up, palms touch. Exhale, chaturanga. Inhale, up. Exhales down. Left leg now, inhale. Exhale, take a step. Back foot goes flat, 2 straight legs, inhale, rise. Exhale, bend the knee, sweep the hands behind. Keep the bend, inhale, reach up, palms touch. Exhale, chaturanga. Inhaling up. Exhales down again. Inhale. Exhale. Concentrate on the pelvis. Inhale, pull the hip points up. Exhale, bend and sweep. Tailbone tucks. Inhale, palms touch. Exhale, chaturanga. Inhaling up. Exhales down. Left side. Inhale. Exhale. Straighten the leg. Inhale, breath. Exhale, bend and sweep. Pull those hip points up. Palms touch. Inhaling. Exhale, chaturanga. Inhale, up. Exhale, down dog. Concentrate, deep breath here. So we'll continue with the focus on neutral pelvis through the entire class. So the next standing sequence, we're only going to be squared to the front for this whole sequence. All right, so if you're not in down dog, let's return to the downward facing dog. Right leg lifts, and then we're going to step to the right thumb this time. Very specific, it's a little bit longer stance. Now, as we like to do, we're going to bend our back knee, tuck the tailbone under for modified crescent lunge rise. Straight line, head stacked over tailbone, knees out a little bit, front ribs in. Now, what I'm going to work on here is keeping a neutral, level, squared pelvis as I slowly straighten into the back leg without letting the pelvis dump forward into our traditional crescent pose. Maybe there's a slight bend still, but I'm not dumping into the pelvis. I'm not losing the energy. I'm keeping everything tight, staying out of my lower spine. And then exhale, I'll sweep the hands behind. Now I want to keep this hip up as I come into warrior three because it's still a level pelvis that we're working here. There's a tendency to let that hip come up, to let the weight shift into that right leg, but we're going to load up the right glute and the right hamstring by rotating the left hip down and plugging the right leg bone into the hip socket. Left glute, hamstring engaged. 3, 2, hands come to the mat. So now in standing splits, there's that tendency to open the hip. We're going to stay squared in the hips, and even if it means it's just like a standing L, grab your right calf. Deep breath here. Take a big step all the way back into a runner's lunge. Okay, this gives us a moment just to break, because what we're going to do next is our Shiva stance. What I want you to notice is that I don't let my hips come up and my head drop down. When I come forward, my knee is going to come to the inside of my calf, inside of my right knee. I'm going to work on level pelvis here as well. So here's how it goes. I line drive the knee forward and I stay low. I point my left toe straight back. I work on level pelvis. Instead of letting that left hip dump, I pull that left knee up a little bit, hands to heart. Getting a nice burn in that right leg, right glute, extension of the spine. 3, 2. Now we're going to slowly rise to stand, left foot next to the right, about 2 fist distance. Our power stance, front ribs pull in, shoulder blades spread, lifted through the crown of the head, tall through the upper back, spreading the lats. Big inhale, reach the arms up. Then we're going to bring the hands to heart center. Now, keeping squared to the front, I'm going to reach back with my left hand and grab. Now, I grab the outside. You can also grab the in, so long as we don't turn the pelvis and flare out the knee. So dancer, we're going to take this right arm and come into a cactus. But make sure you're not pinching the shoulder blade back. Keep your right elbow aligned with your right chest, your pec. Okay? This is going to keep our shoulders squared to the front. Then we start to kick without turning to the left. Kick it back, kick it back, kick it back into the hand. The knee might want to go out, bring it towards center line. 3. Breathe, chest lifting. 2. And 1. Left foot comes down. Inhale, reach up. Exhale, fold forward. Inhale, half lift. Exhale, bottom of push-up, chaturanga. Inhaling up dog. Exhales down. All right, left leg, we lift it up. Step to that left thumb. Now, we start with the modified crescent lunge. Back knee is bent, the tailbone tucks. I pull the hip points up and rise, align my spine, head over tailbone. Knees out a little bit, front ribs in. Now, I don't want to change the position of my pelvis. I want to keep it neutral, pulled up, level, and squared to the front. As I begin to straighten that back leg, you can even keep your hands on your hips to feel it. Pulling up, staying out of the lower back, breathing deep. Then my hands are going to sweep behind. I keep that right hip lifted, the left hip pulled back, because now when I come into my warrior 3, instead of dumping into my left leg, I bring the right hip point down, plug the left leg into the hip socket. Right glute, right hamstring. 3, 2, 1. Hands to the mat. I'm going to reach for my ankle or calf, and maybe as I lift, I see where I'm at without trying to lift it too high and open the hips. Big step all the way back. Runner's lunge. Okay. This Shiva stance. Level pelvis, flat back. That's the goal here. Keep left knee bent deep. Bring your right knee forward, inside, hands to heart. So the left hip wants to go out. The right knee wants to collapse. We're going to pull that right knee up and the left hip back. Prayer hands. 3, 2, rising to stand. Power stance. Hug the earth with your inner thighs. Pull the front ribs in. Spread your lats. Get really tall. Reach up. Come to the heart. Other side. So we're going to go right hand, right foot. I grab the inside. You can grab the out. Pull the left elbow back, but not too far behind. Get it aligned with your chest. Stay square to the front. Start to kick. Don't allow the hips to open. Pull in through the belly. Press forward through the pelvis. 3, 2, and 1. Right foot next to the left. Big inhale, breath, reach up. Exhale, fold forward. Inhale, half lift. Exhale, chaturanga. Inhales, up dog. Exhales, downward facing dog. Coming forward with the right foot. We're going to add a twist. Now, my hips, still working on the level pelvis here. Left hand down. I'm going to go to my block. Left hand pushes down. I'm going to keep that left hip lifted as I begin to twist without dropping into the hip. Breathing deep. 3, 2, and 1. Lower the back knee. Straighten your front leg. All right. So in Hanuman splits, we're going to get to in a second. Neutral, squared, level pelvis. So here's what I like to do. Instead of my right leg going forward, which takes me pretty low but turns my hips to the side, I'm going to end up bringing my left leg back into my splits. And that's going to keep my pelvis squared to the front. Now the work is to pull my hip points up with a little tailbone tuck. 3, 2, and 1. I find it's a little tricky to come out of this. There's no easy, simple way for everybody. So I like to bring my back knee up. I curl my back toes, and as I shift, my back knee lifts, and then I can go back into downward facing dog. Okay, left foot comes forward, runner's lunge, reaching for my block. Simple twist, simple yet misaligned often. So I'm going to keep my right hip lifted, my left hip pulled back, and then I'll find that twist. So tendencies for the hip to kick out, the right hip to collapse. So we're just becoming more aware of all that. You can even feel it on your back foot, big toe, pinky toe, bearing weight evenly, and then lowering to the back knee into half splits. Remember, if I go forward, my pelvis will slide open to the side, and I want to keep neutral pelvis here. So I'll take my right leg and go back, and that's where I'm at. Now I'm pulling my hip points up. You can't see it necessarily, but I can feel the hip points pulling up and the belly drawing in. 3, 2, and 1. Back knee comes up, hands to the front, curl the toes, lift and step. All right, so from here, we're going to come into camel pose, down on the knees. Now the tendency in our camel is to dump pelvis to tilt. So same thing, I'm pulling up and in. I'm going to take my right hand, wrap it around my lower belly, keep that pulled in. Left hand along my bottom ribs, pulling those in. I keep everything nice and tight. Then we'll go into my back bend prep. Straight spine, and I'm just going to go back, 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 and then rise. I'm engaging the core, keeping everything tight before I go into the back bend, keeping hip points lifted, transverse abdominis engaged. We'll go back one more time. And then we rise, and then we'll reach for the feet. For me, I curl my toes underneath, and I like to move forward, then up. I go forward, pelvis down, hip points lift, then the chest. I avoid dropping my head. I keep a lift in my chin, look straight up for 3, 2, and 1. Sit back, find your neutral pelvis, pull everything in. Moving on to our backs. Knees bent, feet flat. Obviously another place where we can feel the pelvis. I pull the hip points up, pull the lower ribs in. This puts me in a neutral position to lift into bridge. My pubic bone is still pulling up. Hip points are pulling toward the ribs. I keep my belly pulled in, pressing down into the ground. Now we'll slowly come on down and let the lower back rest. Good. All right, and I want you just to feel here where your pelvis is, the position that it sits. Keeping that neutral pelvis position. Go ahead and extend your legs out in front of you. Arms by your sides. Just close your eyes. So this class was all about maintaining a neutral pelvis. Very specific. We didn't cover a whole lot of other postures, obviously. It was focused on the pelvis and how in our class we can work on that, keeping the pelvis neutral, protecting our lower backs, and maintaining a steady sense of how we handle our emotions rather than letting our emotions just spill all over the floor or holding our emotions in and pulling them back. All right, thanks everyone for joining me on this one. Feel free to stay as long as you like. Shanti, shanti, shanti. Peace.